And good morning, everyone. Welcome. This is the Coalition on Homelessness July annual, or rather monthly membership meeting. It's great seeing a lot of familiar faces here. For those who might be new, the Coalition meets on the third Thursday of every month from 9 to 11 a.m. to share resources and build community. My name is Jason Austin. I'm the membership organizer here. I'm joined by my colleagues on the call. We like to start our meetings with a reading of our mission and our vision values to sort of ground the shared work that we all find ourselves in. And I believe our Executive Director, Allison Eisinger, has something special in mind for that this morning. Allison?
Thanks, Jason. Good morning, everybody. It's always wonderful when people feel up to it first thing in the morning to see your faces if you're willing and able to turn your camera on. One of the difficulties for all of us during these extraordinary times of COVID-19 is that we're not able to gather in person, and part of the strength of this organization over 40 years of being a convening place for direct service providers, advocates, people with personal experience of homelessness, and allies and partners is that we kind of own this space together. And it's different from a lot of other spaces that get convened in the course of doing the work. This is a space where we get to set the agenda as providers and advocates, and we really enjoy that power that we generate collectively. So thank you so much for joining us and for sharing your name and organization, turning your camera on when and if you feel like it, and for joining on the phone. We are having a bittersweet moment as staff today because this is not just our July general membership meeting. This is actually the last general membership meeting for our wonderful colleague, Hillary Coleman, the Coalition's Community Projects Manager. She has been with us just shy of 6 years, and Hillary joined the Coalition through the UCC Justice Leadership Program internship, fresh out of college, and has done all sorts of wonderful and crucial roles here at the Coalition. We're really delighted that she is headed to graduate school in a couple of months and is going to take a little breathing space in between working and going to school full time. And we're going to be doing a few things to thank her and recognize her service and contributions to the whole community as well as to the Coalition. So Sasha is going to share a link in the chat box for a way that each of you can offer some thanks. I see some comments in the chat, which is lovely. We're going to create a kudo board, which is an online sort of group thank you card. And we're probably going to be hosting an event that is still date to be determined. So we'll talk a little bit about that at the end of the meeting. We have a rich archive of photos from the last 6 years that we're going to share with you along with a few thoughts. But we thought we'd start the meeting this morning by inviting Hillary to read our new mission and vision statements.
Thanks, Allison, and good morning, everyone. It's good to be here together today. The Coalition's mission: we mobilize our community to challenge systemic causes of homelessness and advocate for housing justice. And our vision is a region that acts on a shared sense of responsibility to ensure that everybody has a home. And I'm really glad to be working on this mission and vision with all of you.
Thank you so much, Hillary. Well, we'll welcome everybody's comments in the chat and on the kudo board, and I hope that you'll be able to stick around for the very last few minutes of our meeting. And I will now let Jason start our very packed, as usual, agenda and the incredibly important matter of the set to expire eviction moratorium.
Thank you, Allison. Yes, we're going to start our meeting today with a conversation around the temporary statewide eviction moratorium, attempt to explain the order, give case managers tips for navigating their clients' legal rights, and then let you know what advocacy efforts are being coordinated around this. We're going to start with a presentation by Edmund Witter. He's a staff attorney with the Housing Justice Project who has been doing some really excellent eviction prevention work in our community. Edmund, thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Thanks for having me. Do you want me to start? You're going to share. Got it. So my name is Edmund Witter, he, him pronouns. I'm the senior managing attorney of the Housing Justice Project. So I'm going to kind of give you a quick overview of what's going on with evictions and just sort of give you a brief sort of some points to know in the event the moratorium would not be extended. So if you want to go to the next slide. Just really quickly, we do about 95% of the eviction defense in King County. So we have 2 offices in each of the courthouses. When someone shows up to a courthouse, they'll immediately be pushed, or they have a tenant, they're facing eviction. When they go to the courthouse, the judge is going to send them over our way, and then we will represent them. We pretty much represent anyone unless there's an ethical issue that might prevent that. We also have a social worker on staff. We also co-manage the home-based program, which is a rental assistance program from that courthouse office. You want to go to the next slide? So one of the things that I wanted to sort of just touch on is what's happening with evictions right now, and what are we looking at in terms of how many evictions might happen. I think one of the first things to point out is to what happens even in normal times, which is in normal times, the persons who are most affected by evictions are predominantly people of color. And this was from a study that we did with the Seattle Women's Commission of looking at every eviction in 2017. And the blue bar on the left just shows you what the percentage of overall evictions that racial group basically endured. So for example, Black residents in Seattle in 2017 made up 31% of all evictions, but only 7% of the overall population of Seattle. If you go to the next slide. Similarly, Tim Thomas over at Berkeley, but he was at UW at the time, he did a study that when we looked at all of the court records in several counties, one of the things that he found is that in Pierce County, for example, 1 in 6 Black adults had an eviction compared to 1 in 50 in Pierce County at the time. Similarly, in King County, there's similar disproportionate impacts. And the other thing to keep in mind is that one of the things that was kind of startling to me, and I kind of sense this, but that most tenants in Washington do not actually have any type of access to legal resources at all. And we found that about 8% overall in Washington had representation in the eviction process. And actually the bulk of that was from King County. Outside of King County, there's very little resources for tenants who are facing eviction. If you go to the next slide. One other thing too, I just want to keep in mind is just how precarious tenants are. And this is also from that same study with the Seattle Women's Commission. We found that most evictions happen for a month or less in rent. The orange bar just shows you how many evictions were filed for that amount of money. The blue bar shows you how many of those filings actually result in the tenant having to vacate the premises. About 75% of all evictions at the time were resulting in basically the tenant being forced out of their home involuntarily. But the takeaway from all this is that what we found even in normal times is that people of color are predominantly affected by evictions, and they also tend to face eviction for kind of not a lot amount of money. And so all of these factors are now sort of coming together, and they're going to make the impact of COVID and the economic downturn much more dramatic. So if you go to the next slide. This is from the latest claims. I think they might have updated it yesterday or beginning of the week. But King County right now, what we're seeing is similarly, as you probably noted or in your own circles or what you've seen some of the articles about that, is that unemployment claims are predominantly being filed by people of color as well. In particular, like Native Hawaiian Pacific Islanders have about a 42% filing rate for unemployment. That's about twice the number for white residents in King County. If you go to the next slide. Similarly, it's very concentrated in South King County. So those darker hues as well, especially around SeaTac, Tequila, Renton and South Seattle are having some of the highest unemployment filings right now. And they also happen to have really high rental rates. So if you go to the next slide. For example, Tequila. Tequila is 60% of all households rent in Tequila, and 63% of those of all households are made up of people of color. On average, within all the zip codes that are represented by the King County unemployment filings, they have about 36% unemployment rate. So rental households, precariousness, about the experience of it, generally they find that a lot of rental households will be evicted actually for a pretty small amount of money, as we showed, and predominantly people of color in particular are pretty vulnerable at this time. So if you go to the next slide. And this is from some of the US Census Bureau, which they just updated, I think today. I have not looked at it yet, but one of the things that we've also seen is that out of right now in COVID times, at least as far as June's rent, is that Black residents were behind about 42% of Black residents in Washington state failed to pay June's rent, compared to about 8% for white residents in particular. So again, we're just seeing the same patterns, but even more dramatic that we normally would see in normal times, but they're even being exacerbated now under COVID. If you go to the next slide. I've been also tracking Arkansas, and I just sort of this is just sort of to get a sense of what's actually probably going to happen here. Arkansas is interesting to me because it never had an eviction moratorium, and they also have readily available eviction records. So it's been something that I've been really studying closely. Between May and June of just this year, there was a 172% increase in the number of evictions, which is a pretty stark increase. And like I said, they didn't have a moratorium, so there was no backlog, like there were no cases that were on hold. So this is just really kind of showing us like an increased need from May to June. And within just a couple of weeks, it's probably going to get a lot worse when those federal benefits, so the enhanced unemployment starts subsiding, when all of these other things start disappearing, probably that number is going to start increasing. So, I mean, what I would think is that even despite the CARES Act, despite all those other benefits, we're still going to see probably at least a twofold increase in number of evictions, and potentially higher once all of those benefits or anything else subsides. Go to the next slide. So again, just to reemphasize the same point, is that majority of rental households in King County are not white or made up of people of color, and particularly Black and Latinx households particularly rely on rental housing compared to their white counterparts. And this is, I think, a pretty known fact. I think probably a lot of people in this circle are aware of this, but I always like to draw your attention though to the flip side of it, which is the next slide, which is when we look at landlords, is that they're almost on average, at least those the small time from 1 to 20 units, are 83% of them are white. And I just want to point out how racialized this issue is. The separation between landlords and tenants is not just a wealth gap of who owns property versus who rents it, but it's a race gap. When we fail to intervene, provide tenant protections, what we're actually trying to say overall is that we are going to basically protect white investment over people of color who are predominantly relying on rental housing. And in particular, when we sort of use this sort of arguments that say, well, the small-time landlord's has to pay their mortgage, they're going to lose their home. First of all, I think we have to take issue with equivocating what it means to lose your third or fourth property versus losing the one roof you have over your head. But also, foreclosure laws are much more beneficial. Take by law 190 days before foreclosure can actually happen, let alone the negotiating and leveraging, or the balancing act between whether a foreclosure will happen are very different. And so I just kind of want to draw attention that our failure to provide meaningful tenant protections is an issue around race. It ultimately, if we fail to do it because we are concerned about what's going to happen to landlords overall, what we're actually saying is that we're going to protect, frankly, white investment over people of color when they're no longer able to pay rent. Anyways, let's go to the next slide. I just want to point out just one little thing I'm going to do really quickly, is that there's a big thing about rental assistance right now and why we really need an extension of the moratorium in particular. This is from Arizona. They started a program that was a $5 million rental assistance program back in March, and it started receiving online applications on March 30th. Since then, and it's kind of hard to tell because it got a little bit cut off, but they've gotten about 17,000 applications. About half of them are still in review, and they've only spent $1 million. And that's from March 30th to now. That means that there's a really slow process with rental assistance. As you probably have heard, the Commerce is putting about $100 million out throughout the state. That is going to take a long time to process, frankly. There is some deadlines that have to be met, but right now we have an eviction moratorium that could be ending on August 1st. Even though there's money out there, it's going to take a long time for it to get to everyone. I mean, as you can tell, even down there, they've only approved 7% of those 17,000 applications. That's terrible numbers, frankly, and it makes me really wonder about what they're doing down there. But I'll note that they're using a similar model that's being contemplated by Commerce right now, which is that they're going to give it out to community action programs. So that's sort of like, I think something to just keep in mind about, even though there's money out there, this is going to take a long time. We need an extension of the moratorium to actually make meaningful use of this money, because it is going to be a bureaucratic nightmare trying to get that money out in time, ultimately to people who need it. So it's not going to be a simple solution like that. Anyways, so we go to the next slide. I'll just say really quickly, other states already are doing this. They've extended their moratorium all the way into next year. New York has timed their moratorium to time with the governor's moratorium out there, which means that no tenant can be evicted for non-paying the rent during that time, or for as long as the civil emergency is going to be in effect, which frankly is probably going to be well into next year from what most people are thinking about how COVID is going. Oregon similarly has provided a mandatory grace period so that any rent that's accrued basically from now until September 30th, so actually from April 1st to September 30th, cannot actually be sued or evicted upon until April 1st of 2021. So other states are already kind of embracing this long-term mentality. Like, it's going to take a long time for us to get out of it. If you go to the next slide. So anyways, I'm just going to kind of give you, I was asked to do like a quick spiel of, well, what happens if the moratorium does not get extended? What is that going to actually mean? And I just want to point out a few very basic things, because there's been a lot of changes in the laws in the last couple of years. One thing is that the moratorium doesn't extend on August 1st, what's going to happen is probably a lot of tenants are going to get 14-day notices demanding rent. The one thing that the governor's moratorium has done is that it's required any landlord, before they actually seek rent or try to evict a tenant, is that they have to offer them a reasonable payment plan based on the tenant's finances, health, and circumstances. That's pretty vague, so it's not really clear what that means, but at the least, it probably means the landlord needs to make some type of meaningful attempt to work with tenants who have an ability to pay rent. There's a lot of different opinions about there, like what do you do if a tenant doesn't have any money at all? Is the landlord supposed to wait until the tenant can actually make a payment? I will say, frankly, from my perspective dealing with the courts, is I don't think the courts are going to require a landlord to wait any time at all if a tenant has no ability to pay anything right now. So I think we might be seeing a lot of 14-day notices, especially for those who are unemployed right now. And so just a couple things to keep in mind is the only thing a tenant can be evicted in Washington state for is rent or other periodic charges. So if a landlord is saying, you owe me $10,000 in late fees, which I recently got a letter from a case manager about, those $10,000 in late fees probably aren't even legal to begin with, but they also cannot be the basis for an eviction. So the only thing you really should be focused on is what is the rent that tenant has to pay every month. There might also be utilities that the tenant has to pay the landlord. Those can be included as well. You can be evicted for that. And other like charges that the tenant knows when they sign that lease agreement. What do they have to pay every month to make sure that they're going to stay housed? And that might be like they pay a pet rent every month. They pay a garage fee every month. But those are things that could be included in there. But none of the extra charges, attorney's fees, court costs, anything else, service fees. I see management companies will charge $200 just for putting a notice on your door. That can also not be a part of this case. So the only thing to focus on is try to wear down or try to minimize, focus on what is the rent they actually have to pay. The notice should look like this. It's been actually described by statute. But again, like I said, the governor's moratorium right now, after August 1st, everyone should be at least have an opportunity to enter into a payment plan. If somebody doesn't have any income, it's going to be a little bit hard to say. I would probably be cautious and just try to see what we can do to get them enrolled in the rental assistance program to try to beat off that eviction as much as possible. But if somebody does have some income, there should be some attempt to at least reach some type of payment plan that is going to actually work, that's going to be feasible. And ultimately, you can always contact my office as well. Go to the next slide. And just something else that's not as well known, but that was part of the reforms from the last couple of years, is that even if that 14-day notice, like person comes to you, you're a case manager, you get a tenant, it's like well into September, and it looks like the eviction is really moving on going forward. I want you to just look at this chart, which is just actually telling you that there's still stuff you can do to intervene. And there's actually a lot of things you can do if you have access to rental assistance programs. In particular, after that 14 days is up, it doesn't mean that the tenant cannot still pay and end the case. A lot of property managers will tell you like, oh, I can't take the money. We've sent it off to legal. Good luck to you. I'm going to be showing your apartment now. But actually, the tenant can still stop the eviction. The only thing that the 14-day notice actually does in practice is that it just means that after those 14 days, a landlord can then start an eviction after it. But after the 14 days, a tenant can still stop the eviction, for example, if they pay a late fee of up to $75 along with the rent. That's it. So it's kind of like you pay like a bit of a slight surcharge for paying after the 14 days. If the case actually gets filed, then you might have to pay some court costs, and you don't have to pay attorney's fees unless it goes all the way to an eviction hearing and the judge says you have to, as a tenant, pay attorney's fees. This is just something that's kind of, it's in there. It's sort of, it's a longer process now. This did not exist more than 2 years ago. It used to be that after the 3-day notice, you were done and there was nothing else you could do. But there's a lot here potentially you can still do.
Wonderful. Edmund, thank you so much. I really hate to cut you off here. This content is excellent. We are going to be providing everyone with a copy of these presentation slides after the meeting. And Edmund, are you available to answer questions offline for folks that have them?
Yeah. And just if you go to the last slide, it has our contact information.
Okay. Edmund, thank you so much for joining us this morning. We really appreciate it. Now, we wanted to throw things over to Michele Thomas with the Washington Low Income Housing Alliance, who's going to review some advocacy-related efforts around this topic as well. Michele, thank you so much for being on our call this morning.
Good morning. Hi. So I just wanted to talk about the advocacy related to this. And again, I just want to double down on some of the information that Ed shared. The Pulse survey data is really critical. And I think, as Ed said, 247,959 households in Washington state were unable to pay the rent in June. And again, 42% of Black households who responded, Black renter households, said they were unable to pay the rent. And 34% of Hispanic Latino households were unable to pay versus 8% of white households. Equally concerning is a similar racial divide between confidence in ability to pay rent the coming month. So this was June data, so that would be for July. The Housing Alliance is going to be watching this data as it comes out. The Census Bureau is releasing it every Wednesday morning. It did release new information yesterday, but we think that the end of the month data is the most important. There's a lot of variance between who they reach on a weekly basis. And what we're noticing is that there appears to be a correlation between the number of people they're able to reach on a weekly basis and a correlation between how many tenants are reporting an inability to pay rent. So the less tenants they are able to reach, the lower that number goes. The more tenants they reach, the higher that number goes as a percentage of overall renters, though, of renter respondents. So we'll be updating that data at the end of the month because there's massive swings throughout the month. But for now, the data we have for the month of June is what we just provided. A couple of other points about that data I think is really important to consider is that a ton of tenants, hundreds of thousands of tenants in Washington state report relying on credit cards to meet their most basic needs, including paying rent. And hundreds of thousands of more tenants are relying on credit cards than unemployment insurance. So in addition to this pending eviction and homelessness crisis on our hands, we have a significant debt crisis on our hands that I think you all understand the consequences of that. Remember that landlords routinely do tenant screening reports. They check tenants' credit reports, and tenants who have a lot of debt, unpaid debt, have a lot of they have a much harder time getting into housing, a lot of additional barriers. And oftentimes landlords just use that as an excuse to get around fair housing laws. So it's extremely concerning that that's happening right now as well, and just something to consider. And it's something that we are keeping in mind as we look forward to policies that we're going to ask the legislature to enact in order to deal with the crisis. So just quickly backing up a little bit, I think you all probably know, but I think just for this context, it's really important to emphasize that the legislature will not be meeting during the summer. There was anticipation for an August special session that is not going to happen. It is slightly possible that the legislature will convene in November. If they do, though, they will not be, it'll be extremely unlikely that they will be considering policy. So what does that mean for renters in this looming eviction crisis? It means that the fate of renters in Washington state and the ability to not create a massive homelessness crisis, the likes of nobody has ever seen before, is all in the hands of the governor at this point. Hence the need to really ramp up the request to extend the eviction moratorium. On top of this, though, we know that the Washington Landlord Association and the Rental Housing Association are fundraising right now to file a lawsuit against the state to undo the eviction moratorium in full. They want to preserve their right to kick tenants to the curb, and they care more about their bottom line than they do about a massive homelessness crisis that would result if the eviction moratorium were not to continue. There was a Crosscut article about that the other day, and a really brave tenant named Phoenix shared her story. So I encourage you to check that out. And just as an aside, to support the good reporting that our few actual investigative reporters are doing. Crosscut is really the only entity left that does, or one of the few entities left, I would say, that does really good reporting on issues impacting low-income folks, people of color, and on homelessness in general. As I think Ed mentioned, the rental assistance program is still being worked out by the Department of Commerce. Thank you for your advocacy and asking the governor to release funds from the federal COVID-related funds for rental assistance. They agreed to release $100 million, which sounds like a lot of money, and it is, obviously. But if you just take June's rental arrears alone, and if you multiply that by what the average rent is in Washington State, that could be a debt of over $300 million for renter households in Washington State for 1 month alone. So a part of this, I would just say as an aside, is the dysfunction of ESD and their inability to get unemployment benefits out to the many people who need them. A lot of people are relying on rental assistance or relying on the eviction moratorium or relying on credit card debt instead of getting the unemployment benefits that they deserve. And so I think we also just really be extremely concerned about the dysfunction at ESD and its direct link to the pending homelessness crisis. But one correction to what Ed said, he said that the money is going to the CAPS. That's not correct. The proposal was that it's going to go to the Consolidated Homeless Grant grantees. Some of those might be CAPS, but not all of them are. I think a really important component to the rental assistance proposal is that they're really considering very carefully how undocumented immigrants and communities of color will be direct recipients of the funds because of the disproportionality and impact. And so I actually think that that's a really good sign that our state agency is thinking deeply about equity. And they've had a thoughtful proposal on how to ensure that that happens. There was an opportunity to weigh in and help direct that. And I hope many of you took advantage of that opportunity to share concerns or options, correct ideas. That was due on the 1st, on Monday at noon. Unfortunately, I know that they got a ton of landlord complaints. And so not all of the information that they received was helpful, but we're still hopeful that the way that that money will roll out will ensure that the hardest hit communities are first in line for those funds. But that remains to be seen. So lastly, I just want to emphasize the importance of action. I don't think $100 million would have been released at all. I don't think anything near it, maybe not even a dime, would have been released if there wasn't advocacy. $100 million isn't enough, but it's better than nothing. The eviction moratorium wouldn't exist if it wasn't for advocacy either. At this point, what our ask is around the eviction moratorium is to extend it through March 31st. That is what's needed in order to give the legislature an opportunity to convene when they come back for their normal legislative session in January and to pass a legislative solution to prevent this eviction crisis from occurring. So our ask is to extend it through the 31st. And as Ed said, that's not totally unprecedented in terms of what other jurisdictions are doing. But my point about advocacy is that none of this is possible without a ton of people taking action. So I'm going to drop into the chat right now our action alert link. And I really encourage you all to take action this morning and to bring this action request to your networks. It's a pretty bold ask. The governor has been extending the moratorium for much shorter bits at a time, which is excellent. So he definitely deserves to be thanked. We have one of the best moratoriums in the country. But we really do just need to extend it for a significant period. And I'll just the last thing I'll say about that is that's incredibly important for the renter households who are watching that deadline every single time it comes near and wondering if this one's going to be it. Is this one going to be the one where the landlord is finally going to be able to evict them? And the stress that that's having on hundreds of thousands of households across this state is significant. That's trauma. And we really need to ensure that people have the safety net and the peace of mind to know that until the state comes up with another solution, that they're going to be safe in their homes and that they're not going to experience homelessness in the middle of a pandemic and right when the school year is supposed to be starting. So I really hope you'll join us in taking action. Thank you so much, Skitch, for everything you do. And Hillary, I just want to give you a shout out. You were amazing. Congratulations. I always try to say congratulations instead of I'm sad to see you go, but I really am sad to see you go. You're a big gift to this world. So thank you for your work.
Thanks, Michelle.
Thank you so much, Michelle. And thank you very much to Edmund as well. I think everyone who is part of the coalition understands the value of advocacy and understands why it's important not only to take action yourself, but to engage others in taking action. One of the small positive things about the fact that we are now meeting online is that even though we know our brains don't really allow us to multitask, it is actually possible for you to participate in the action, taking the action through the link that Michele and I think Sasha also shared online while we proceed with our meeting. So we encourage, there's 75 people on this call. That's an opportunity for 75 more messages to go to the governor. We know that this is a crisis within a crisis within a crisis, and we are in this crisis for a long time. So extending the moratorium on evictions is not actually a solution. It is a way of buying time, and it is a way of ensuring that we don't compound the crises that people are already experiencing. And as we can see, disproportionately people of color, and of course, people with the lowest incomes. So please do take action and share as we know that you will. And we're going to move on to something that is actually a piece of really important, bright, good news in the context of the work that we are all doing. Things are moving so fast, you might have missed it, or it might feel like it was a long time ago, but just last week, the Seattle City Council passed 7-2 JumpStart Seattle, which is a significant progressive corporate payroll tax that will raise at least $214 million a year to address the housing needs and immediate crisis relief needs of Seattle residents. I think people know, but I'm going to just share a tiny bit of the background. As one of the coalition's board members commented during our board meeting last week, the fact that JumpStart Seattle has finally passed is a reminder to all of us that advocacy means you have to be in it for the long haul. We've worked for years to secure progressive taxes at every level of government, frankly. And in Seattle, we've been part as the coalition, and many of you individually have been part of multiple efforts, including, but not limited to, the employee hours tax, also known as the head tax, that was passed but then swiftly repealed, including efforts during this most recent legislative session to pass a version of the corporate payroll tax at the state level through Representative Macri's 2907 bill. And the JumpStart Seattle legislation is significantly larger than previous efforts. And we are in fact not completely sure how large it will be, because the largest corporation, that is Amazon, is so large that it's in its own category of employment data. So the calculations aren't based on the full information about what their corporate payroll looks like. Now, that's the good news. It's terrific news. If you remember, when we were working incredibly hard to pass the employee hours tax, we were talking about $47.5 million a year for 5 years. This is $214 million a year for at least 20 years. However, it still needs to be signed by Mayor Jenny Durkin. And there is a possibility that the mayor could veto the legislation. There's also a possibility, because the tax part of the legislation and the spending plan of the legislation were separated to expedite the legislative process. There's still conversation happening about the spending plan, and that's why we have another action that we'd like you to take. Hillary has set up one of our quick action links, and someone's going to drop it in the chat box. We are going to invite you to take action. Obviously, this is an action that you need to be a Seattle resident to take, because it is based on your address. And it is a quick alert that will go to city council members, as well as, if you scroll down, to the mayor. We want the mayor to sign the legislation swiftly. Actually, today is the 10th day past the vote at council. And we are working right now with council members on the spending plan. This is really a bold initiative that is focused on addressing the immediate economic crisis and trying to make sure that the recovery process is equitable, trying to ensure that small businesses, including childcare providers and businesses that pay a living wage to their employees, are getting the support that they need and they may have missed out on the federal Paycheck Protection Program, as well as increasing food security and direct payments to families, including those who may have been deliberately excluded from receiving federal benefits, but then over time to invest deeply in deeply affordable housing. So thank you for taking action on that. And I want to talk a little bit now about the other extraordinary things that are happening with respect to the Seattle budget. I want to recognize that this is not our, oops, I think somebody might need to mute themselves there. I want to emphasize that obviously we're talking a lot about City of Seattle right now. There is enormous attention on the Seattle budget for several reasons, not least of which is the dramatic need to address defunding the police. But we have actually a lot of activity going on at King County as well. However, the work that's happening at the City of Seattle is heightened because of the confluence of the fact that we have a $300 million projected revenue shortfall for the remainder of 2020, and calls to defund the Seattle Police Department by 50%. And we are more than halfway through the year. Normally, the budget process happens in the fall at the city and the county. And this fall, there will also be a budget process that will look at either 2021, 2022, which is the normal process, or one of the suggestions from the mayor to the council yesterday was to only do a one-year budget. And I think that that's a reflection of the high degree of uncertainty that everyone has in what the finances are going to look like. But that is one of the 12 budget bills that the mayor has sent to the council to take a look at and to make their mark on before they pass a final piece of legislation. So I think Sasha or Jason or Hillary, I asked you to put a link into the chat box about the summer budget calendar. It's fast and furious. It is underway right now. And essentially, council is meeting on Mondays and Wednesdays, with possible Thursday meeting as needed next week. This week, the budget committee met in the morning and spent a good deal of time on this proposed spending plan amendments for JumpStart Seattle, but in the afternoon also took up important information and what are called issue papers related to what does it mean to defund SPD by 50%. And those conversations include profoundly necessary conversations about how to redirect resources from law enforcement, which, as we know, has been called upon to respond to all kinds of things that do not require an armed police response, including, of course, people experiencing homelessness and people in crisis. So I want to just be clear, the Seattle King County Coalition on Homelessness has signed on to the Decriminalize Seattle priorities. The Decriminalize Seattle and King County Equity Now presentations are important and extensive. If you have the time, I really do recommend that you take a look at the workshop that they held a few days ago, and I think we're going to share the link with you in the follow-up about that. You can find the workshop and engage in it. We're offering the information and experience that we have from the coalition, and I think what we know is that the process over the next few weeks is an extremely accelerated, extremely important one, but it is only the beginning. Or rather, it is the middle, because there are many, many folks and organizations that have been working on these issues for a long time. Our own involvement in the coalition on, broadly speaking, police accountability issues and the need to do things like defund the navigation team in its entirety are not new to our members and our stakeholders. But there is extraordinary opportunity now being led by Black-led community organizations to not just talk about those issues, but really implement those changes. So we're doing our best to provide enthusiastic support and to contribute to the whoops, that's my little reminder that I'm getting close to the end, to contribute to the work that's happening right now. I want to say that there are a number of things that we want to engage you, our members, in discussing, including this question of 911 response. We thought about doing some breakout conversation about it today, but I think we need to align our work a little bit more thoughtfully before we invite you all into it. So I want to just give you a heads up that among the things that is under discussion in our community and communities across the nation is the necessity to think about what does it mean to call for emergency response. And Councilmember Andrew Lewis has proposed one version of what that might look like. There are a lot of community groups that are looking at different models of what civilianizing a 911 response would be, and clearly differentiating between what is serious, immediate, violent crime and everything else. And we want to also recognize that as homeless service providers, housing providers, our member organizations rely on 911, call 911, in some cases have contractual arrangements with or memorandums of understanding with SPD, King County Sheriff's Office, or other law enforcement entities. So we think it's really important and necessary to start with an examination within coalition member organizations about what that means. When do you call 911? What are you expecting when you call 911? what has the experience for staff and the people you serve been when you call 911? And what are the better ways of responding? And how do we invest in those and help to build them? Some of our member organizations are actually already involved in crisis response, but at a very small way. And the other piece of this that is crucial is to think about how do we go from a pilot project or 1 or 2 or 5 members of a mobile crisis team to dozens and hundreds of people who have the skills, experience, and equipment to be able to respond. I think that folks who are involved in Decriminalize Seattle have done a really good job of pointing out that this isn't a flip the switch situation and nothing is going to be perfect right away, but the system that we have is so profoundly imperfect, so harmful, and so embedded in the racist DNA of our nation that it's imperative to make these changes. So it would be great to just get a little bit of input from you, perhaps in the chat box, because we need to move on in our agenda, to hear any thoughts that you might have about specifically your organization's engagement with law enforcement, so that we can do a little bit of follow-up with you. And we may be inviting you, excuse me, to give some input to us in a more structured way. The other thing that I want to say is we are pretty confident that there is great opportunity at the moment to move the harmful work of the navigation team out. And we know that skilled, meaningful outreach and engagement is necessary and must include appropriate, accessible places for people to go. So scaling up what our shelter and housing capacity is another imperative, both short-term and long-term. And when we get to the coalition staff updates later on, Hillary is going to share something about our work at the coalition and with all of you to document what shelter capacity changes have been in our community, so that we can speak from a point of information with electeds about how much shelter capacity we have lost, and of course, how much unmet need there is in our community. So with that, I think that it's now time to let Hillary do a really important piece of our advocacy work, which is supporting you all in making sure that every eligible voter is registered and knows how to vote and participate, particularly during the pandemic. Hillary, over to you.
Yeah, thanks so much, Allison. So as many of you probably know, the coalition has been doing work to support people who are experiencing homelessness in registering to vote and vote for, I believe, 11 or 12 years now. Maybe it's even slightly longer than that. And we, with your support and the support of our volunteers, shout out to Barb, who I see on the call here, have helped register thousands of people and help people update their addresses in that time. And we really, due to COVID, you know, typically what we have done is we've had volunteers go to day and hygiene centers and some meal programs, some places where all of you work, to support people in registering to vote who are likely to be outside the night before, and in places where there is not a lot of staff capacity to support that. And we've also worked with many of you to support the people you work with in registering to vote and making sure that their voter registrations are up to date. Because of the pandemic this year, we are not going to be able to have our trained volunteers go out. We just want to make sure that we're being respectful of the people that you all serve, having the least amount of exposure, and knowing that that is just kind of where we're at right now. So at least for the August primary, which we're specifically talking about today, we can't have the volunteers go out. So we wanted to take some time during this meeting to talk to you all about making sure you have the resources to support people that you work with in ensuring that they're get to vote in this election. So the August 4th primary election in our state is a pretty important one. I know that many of us are thinking of November 3rd as the presidential election, the federal election, also a very important election. But August 4th, in the primary, we are going to be voting on things like our state governor. There's a lot of candidates for that. Our lieutenant governor, other leadership positions in the state, state senators and representatives whose terms are up. And in all of those races, the top 2 people will go on to the general election in the November election. And so it's important that all of us are voting ourselves and encouraging everyone we know to be voting. And part of why the coalition does this work is we want to end homelessness and know that to do that, we need to build political power, and voting is a fundamental way to build political power. We want to make sure that everyone's voice is heard, and we want to make sure that people who don't have a home or don't have a residential address that's a stable one know that they can still vote. We also, and I'll go through all this, want to talk about the Voting Rights Restoration Act for people with felony convictions and ensuring that people know that they have the right to vote restored once they're done reporting to the DOC. And we have, as a coalition and with many of your supports over the past few years, expanded voting rights even further and made voting more accessible to people across our state. And so I'm glad to say that in this pandemic, voting will not change a ton for people that we are working with. It will a bit. There's some things that are different, but since we already have a really solid vote by mail system and an elections office here locally in King County that is dedicated to ensuring that people's voices are going to be heard, I think there are many ways that we're going to be able to help and plug in. So Sasha just shared a link that has our voter online version of the voting guide. I'm going to kind of go through a lot of stuff in a PowerPoint. I want to walk you through what it's going to look like to help people register online. And then I promise we will share all of this via email with you. And especially while we're going through this, I just invite you to think about how this might look at your organization if you're working with people you work with. And then I will have time for some questions towards the end of this. And if you have any questions throughout, go ahead and put them in the chat box, and I may be able to answer it in the moment, or I'll definitely get back to it. So can I just confirm that people can see the screen that I shared? Great, okay. So here, just wanted to always start with the basics of the eligibility to vote in Washington. And this poster on the right side, we are happy to send you copies of that poster to post while you're helping people vote. So in Washington State, to vote, there are 4 eligibility requirements. You need to be a US citizen. You need to be 18 on election day, which is August 4th. So if someone's 18th birthday is August 4th, they can register ahead of time and vote because they'll be 18. If it's the day after, they can register for the November election. You need to currently live in Washington State. The technical rule says that you need to have been a Washington State resident for 30 days before the election. So that just means living in Washington State for 30 days before the election. I would assume that most folks we are working with fall into that category. And then you are not currently reporting to the Department of Corrections for a Washington State felony. And we always, so with that, we have a little bit of information about, there's an ACLU guide, which is linked, and we'll send out this link. But just wanted to touch for a moment on the voting with the felony conviction. Anybody who has a felony conviction in Washington State and is no longer reporting the Department of Corrections is eligible to register and vote. You do have to re-register if you were registered before and lost the right. This is due to a 2008 law that passed. But many people still don't know about that law change. And as we all know, I think voting rights are state by state. So people from other states who are coming to Washington might not have been eligible to vote in their state, but are eligible here. If someone had a federal felony conviction or a felony conviction from another state, as long as they're not incarcerated, they can vote in Washington state as long as they meet the other criteria. And then also if someone is in jail or if someone is awaiting trial for a felony conviction, they can still vote until someone has a felony conviction and is currently serving time for that or reporting the DOC. Those are the only times when someone is not eligible to vote. I know many of you are trying to work to expand these rights even further with us during the legislative session, and there's still more advocacy around that. So especially if you work with a lot of folks who deal with felony convictions and being disenfranchised, we hope that you'll get involved in that advocacy with us. So we have our Tuesday, August 4th primary. There are going to be 3 ways that people can register to vote for this. One is online, and I'm going to walk through some screenshots of what that process looks like. For online, someone does need a valid Washington state issued ID, and that is to verify who they are. So I know that's we tend to have people register with paper forms when we go to do voter registration, because in the paper form, all you need is the last 4 of your social security. So I just want to say, I know that's a barrier for some folks. Unfortunately, that's how the online system is, but there's also the paper system. And for both online and paper registration, it has to be received by King County Elections by Monday, July 27th. The online, you can register up until 11:59 p.m. But then with paper registration, it needs to ensure that something is received by King County Elections in the mail. And so we encourage you, if you're going to help people register with a paper form, to send that in the mail a few days ahead so that you can get to King County Elections in time. There are also going to be 2 in-person vote centers, and they're going to be at CenturyLink Field in Seattle on August 1st, 3rd, and 4th, and I have a little more information about this. And then at King County Elections in Renton, and that's already happening right now. And so those are both places where if people need to go register in person for any reason, they can go to those places. You can also go there to request a new ballot. And those will be open until 8 p.m. on Election Day. And in the days between July 27th and Election Day, people can still go in person to register to vote. The reason you have to go in person is because you need to make sure that you're going to be able to get a ballot. But if you're working with folks after July 27th who need to register to vote, they can still do that at CenturyLink Field on the date, or in Renton on the dates that they're open. So I'm just going to walk you through what it looks like to register to vote online. And again, I will share these slides out with you because part of what you have to do is enter your ID. And I took some screenshots so that if you're taking this back to folks you work with, you can show them what the process will be like. And there's a couple links of also checking someone's registration status. I kind of like to say to people when I'm asking them if they're registered, if someone has not gotten a ballot that they remember in the past year, they should go ahead and register to vote again. So when you go to the link that we shared, and you'll get this all in the follow-up, this is what you'll see, an online voter registration, and you'll want to go ahead and hit the start button. And then somebody will be asked to answer these questions here. So these are the qualifications I talked about earlier. I'm a US citizen, at least 18 on election day, the name, the birth date. You need both the name and the birth date. Gender is optional. The options are male and female, and someone can leave that blank if that doesn't feel right to them. I know that's a limited options. And then identification is you enter the ID number of someone's Washington State ID, and then the issue date there. And then on the next, and it will stop you if some of the information is missing. So just know that. The next page is going to ask if someone's currently serving in the military or living outside the US, like we know. So you want to make sure that that is said how it is. And then this is asking for someone's email or phone number. They are optional, but the time that they'll use them is to contact someone if they have a question about their registration form. They're not going to be put into a database to be called about election campaigns. That is not what happens with this data. But we do suggest that people fill out one of those because we want to make sure folks can get their ballots. And so if there is a question, that's how the elections office will contact them. And then here we have the address section. And so what's going to happen is it's going to show here that someone needs to enter an address. And many folks that we work with are not going to have a traditional residential address to enter. That is okay. So in this online version, what you're going to want to do is hit non-standard address. And then what's going to pop up is having this option of a mailing address as well. So people need to put something in a residential address, either online or in a paper form, and I'll show you a paper form as well, that Mark can identify what area they live in, because that will decide their precinct for voting and who they're voting on, what issues they're voting on. But that can be something, in the online version, I'll show you in a moment, it's going to be picking a spot on a map, but it can be something like 4th and James in Seattle. It can be the address of a shelter if that's where someone spends most of their time. It's open to, I usually ask someone, you know, where do you spend a lot of your time? And then we figure out something based on that. I want to say it does not have to be the exact point where someone has a tent outside. For example, we want to make sure that someone's feeling safe about what they're putting, but something close by, and that again, telling folks that that's going to help figure out where they vote. You all know the folks that you work with pretty well and the folks that come through, so you can help them figure that out. But someone will need a mailing address, and I think many, you know, I would say that most of you probably know how to get someone a mailing address if they don't have one, or if you are able to accept mail, especially around ballots, it would be great for you to be able to offer that to somebody so they can get their ballot in the mail. So for the non-standard address, once you click that box, this map is going to pop up and it's going to be really zoomed out, and you're going to want to help someone zoom in and find the spot that they're marking on a map. Again, it can be a shelter, a day center, cross streets near where they stay. And also you'll have to fill out the narrative box. So you can put an intersection, or you can say something like a park name or something. And then once that happens, it will take you to the next page, and all this information will be filled out. And then this is the final, and I know I'm kind of zooming through this, but I want to beware of time. This is the final part. This is the declaration. And if you're helping someone fill this out either online or via paper, I suggest that you make sure you read the declaration to them just so they know what they're saying. And essentially it's saying that all of the criteria were true. And I did not hit next on this because I was not going to register myself to vote again in this method, but I think the next section would just be a final submit one. So then the other option of registering is registering with a paper form. This link, which we'll send out to you, is you can download paper forms and just print them on a normal piece of 8.5 by 11 printer paper and help someone fill it out. The forms are available in 23 languages, and ballots are available in 5 languages in King County. And these must be received by 8 days prior to the election, so by the 27th to King County elections. You know, I'm gonna kind of skip over this mostly because these are the same types of things that we just talked about in the online version, but I've included this in the PowerPoint. We'll send it out, which says which information is needed and talks a little bit about filling out the residential address and cross streets. With the paper form especially, I would encourage filling out a phone or an email just in case there's a question. And then here somebody can enter the last 4 of their social security. In either of these, if anyone has any old information, they can share that if it's helpful. And then signing with the legal signature. And the reason that the ID is needed for the online one is because they'll use the signature on your state issued ID to compare to the signature on your ballot. And so since you don't, and for this, they'll compare the signature on this registration form to the signature on your ballot when someone votes. And then really quickly, voting in the election. So people should be getting their ballots in the next couple of days. They were mailed out yesterday. And there are 3 ways to return the ballots. You can use a ballot drop box, which are open until 8 p.m. on election day. And this link tells you where to find those drop boxes. Someone can mail in their ballot. No stamp is needed because we have prepaid postage. But you want to make sure that it's going to be postmarked by 5 p.m. on August 4th. I would encourage people to mail it at least a day earlier just to make sure it gets that postmark. And then going in person to a vote center. There's also information about getting a voter pamphlet, and you can call elections if you need a few copies of voter pamphlets. And then this here is our vote center information. Again, we'll send this out, but the Renton Vote Center is open weekdays through Election Day, and then Saturday, August 1st as well. The one in downtown Seattle at CenturyLink Field will just be open on Saturday, August 1st, Monday, August 3rd, and Election Day, August 4th. I'm going to end that and then see what questions we have. And I know this is a lot of information. So let's see, my staff, was there any questions in the chat box that seem like I need to answer them? Or does anyone have a question that they'd like answered?
Hillary, somebody wanted to know whether or not it's possible to fill these forms out on a phone or a tablet.
That's a good question. Yes, it is, as long as someone has a state ID. In fact, I tried doing this yesterday on my phone. I would say that you know, especially if you're helping someone fill it out, just being able to be close to them in a hopefully distance way to make sure that if they have any questions, you can let them know, but it is possible. And I would recommend, if you're going to be doing this, which we highly encourage you to help people register, looking again through the slides that we'll send out to see what those screenshots are so that you know what things people are going to use, and maybe even plugging in your own information just to get partway through to understand how that system is going to work for someone.
And somebody asked an interesting question, which is, how long does it take to get a Washington State ID? Now, I will say that Jason has been working on a mini training that we'll have to maybe speed up about how to get ID, since if you've ever helped someone do it, it is a little bit Kafkaesque, but it can be done. But Hillary, do you have any information about that length of time?
I don't for Washington State ID, but I will tell you one thing I forgot to mention is that when someone registers to vote, they will get a voter ID card. It does not have a photo, but it does count as another form of government issued ID. For most of you on the phone probably know that often people need multiple forms of government issued ID. And so the voter registration card itself typically comes 4 to 6 weeks after someone registers. When we're registering right ahead of an election, of course, the elections are going to, officers are going to be focused on getting the ballots processed, counted in. So it might take a little bit longer to get that ID card, but it should come in the mail.
And then I know we need to move to the next part of the agenda, but there's a question in the chat, which maybe you can answer, Hillary. And then what I will just say is, obviously, this is an incredibly important time for you all to be helping folks. The King County Elections staff at the 206-296-VOTE phone number are extremely responsive and helpful. And I would suggest that people contact King County Elections for general questions first, but we want you to contact us if you need help or if you have questions, particularly helping people experiencing homelessness register to vote. You can send an email to vote@homelessinfo.org. And if you're going to help people register, we might have some materials to help you do that. We really want to work with you to figure out how are we going to transition our voter registration and civic engagement work to take into account COVID-19, but not to slow down one tiny bit, given what is coming up in November and given the importance of people exercising the franchise. So
Thanks. And one other thing I would really briefly add is that we would love if you are able to just keep a simple tally of how many people you're helping register or update their registration. That helps us be able to show the importance of this work in our community. And
yes.
yep, and so we are happy to send you materials if you email vote@homelessinfo.org, and we'll send all that stuff I just went out in the follow-up as well. So thank you.
Great. Terrific. All right. I think the next thing is a sneak peek of a workshop that is coming up about financial empowerment tools for you to use.
That's right.
Back to Jason.
Thank you, Allison, and thank you, Hillary. To the question about how long does it take to get an ID, the short answer is it depends. It's one of many topics that we're going to be covering at our next case manager training series, which we will be hosting 2 weeks from this very moment, Thursday, July 30th at 10 a.m. The title of this training is Financial Empowerment, Tools for Homeless Service Providers. We're lucky enough to be joined on the call by two of the presenters of this training, Donna O'Connor and Emily Goodwright with Hopelink, who are going to give us a sneak preview of what to expect. Donna and Emily, thanks so much for joining us here this morning.
Thanks.
Hi.
Hi.
Oh, Donna's back in. Sorry.
Yeah, I'm having internet difficulties, so I was literally just on. I just heard Hillary's great presentation, and then boom, dropped out. So if I drop off again, Stephanie, I know you're there too, and Emily. So thanks so much for having us. Yeah, so like Jason said, we're planning to do a training on July 30th. We are really excited. What I'm going to do is just kind of share a brief overview of some of the financial empowerment tools that we've been using for many years at Hopelink, both in our financial capability program, as well as our case management program. And so I'll basically kind of go over you know, how these tools came to be and how we're engaging with them. And then Emily's going to talk a little bit more about how the case management team is engaging with the actual tools more deeply with clients more on a day-to-day basis. So, you know, basically this all starts with the need or the desire to incorporate financial empowerment, mostly because it's really impossible to disentangle financial stability or financial instability's effect on pretty much every part of our clients' lives. It's really hard to separate those things. And the constant stress of needing to carefully manage financial resources often diminishes their ability to overcome barriers and move forward in all aspects of their lives. So we really feel like it's an important piece of what we all do. We use a toolkit called Your Money, Your Goals. It is a free and accessible financial empowerment toolkit that's developed by the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, the CFPB. I think it's really important to note that this is not a curriculum. It's not meant to be, you know, a financial education toolkit. It is also not meant to make everyone a financial counselor. It's really meant to kind of look at each individual module and tool and see how that works with the work that you're already doing, and more importantly, how that meets the needs of our clients. So it's designed really to help anyone who works with or serves folks who are either low income or economically vulnerable. And it's a way to start having money conversations that will help our clients, you know, build their financial skills and help them move toward financial stability. As I mentioned, it's kind of broken down into modules by topic, and it contains tools that you can use in practice with the people that we serve every day. And it's also meant to help organizations integrate financial empowerment in the work they're already doing. And as I said, and probably the most important, is in the way that meets the needs of our clients. So it's very flexible. That's kind of a high level overview of what the toolkit is. And why we use it. I have some links that I'm going to put in the chat, both to the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau as well as the Your Money, Your Goals toolkit. And then I'm just going to turn it over to Emily, and she can share a little bit more about how our case management team is currently using Your Money, Your Goals in the work they're doing every day.
Hi, everyone. My name is Emily Goodwright, and I'm a case manager at Hopelink. And like Donna said, I'm just going to talk to you briefly about how our case management program has started to implement, well, has been implementing Your Money, Your Goals principles and tools. So in our case management program, we work with homeless and low-income families who reside in our shelters, our temporary and permanent housing sites, and as well as working with families who live in the community who voluntarily seek case management. And when we're working with families, we really prioritize helping families both find and maintain housing, as well as increase their income. And for many of these families, they're also working on their credit scores and developing better budgeting skills. And the Your Money, Your Goals tools have really helped us work with clients and being successful in meeting their financial goals, whether it is related to housing or increasing their income. And these are tools that we will be going over at the Your Money, Your Goals training on July 30th. So remember to register for that. So I did want to go over some specific tools that we have been using in our program. One of the tools that we have utilized is a cash flow calendar, and this allows families to see what money comes in and where money goes each month. This can help families track the timing of their expenses and income to make sure they have enough money week to week. So this may help them move around bills. So, you know, their internet bill is coming out after they get paid on the 15th of the month. Just so there isn't like 1 week where they have no money coming in and they have a ton of expenses. We also use a budgeting tool, which helps families budget for expenses each month. This allows families, this allows us to see what families are typically spending on certain items, such as food, internet, cell phones, and then connect families to resources that can lower the cost of these things, like the Internet Essentials program, or the Safe Link cell phone program. And then we also have a financial help checklist, which our case management team developed, which gives us an overview of clients' financial situations and kind of what goals they want to work on, whether that's improving their credit score, saving for a car, saving for a house. And then we also partner with TransUnion in order to help clients check their credit scores and begin the process of repairing their score if that is a goal that they have. So in facilitating these Your Money, Your Goals trainings for other case management providers and just other providers in general, and diving deeper into these tools, we are hoping to not only kind of refresh our knowledge of all the tools available to us for work with our clients, but also ensure that in working on financial goals and resiliency with clients, we are using best practices that are available to us. And Stephanie, is there anything else that you feel needs to be added?
No, I think you both covered it. So I guess we could open it up to see if anyone has any questions.
Thank you so much for joining us here. If anyone does have any questions, I want to move us along because we have some more good content to cover, but please send those to us. We would love any sort of what you're hoping to get out of this training or any questions about this topic that we can incorporate into our training on Thursday, the 30th. Yeah, Stephanie, Donna, and Emily, thank you so much for joining us. All right, now we quickly want to move along to just a few coalition updates of some things we've been working on, starting with something that Allison mentioned earlier around shelter capacity. Hillary, do you want to give folks a quick update on that project we've been working on?
Great. Hello again. So we have been working with our county partners at DCHS and some folks in the city of Seattle just to get a picture of what our shelter capacity changes have been due to COVID. We know that social distancing and the need to space out beds, as well as staffing things that have come up, have caused the capacity to change some. And we wanted to thank everyone who's provided input to our service change tracker, which is online. This was kind of like the next step of the complementariness of that. So those of you who operate shelter have probably either heard from Jason and Sasha and myself, or someone at the county or city, or they've already been talking to you enough and knew your information. We are trying to make this as low time as possible on shelter providers for getting the information. But what we were really looking at was looking at what the shelter capacity was on the night of the one night count in January, and of the point in time count in January, and then looking at what the shelter capacity is right now and trying to get a snapshot of that. As an advocacy organization, we are going to be using that really important information to inform some of our upcoming advocacy, as we all know that we want to make sure we are increasing shelter capacity overall as a system, not decreasing shelter capacity, and also calling attention to the different things that have been happening, such as finding less congregate shelter that is better for people to prevent the spread of COVID. So we're going to be using some of that for our advocacy upcoming. It's also, of course, important for the county and the city as funders and as good partners to have a good sense of what that capacity is. And I just wanted to also say that throughout all of this, nothing was to look at an organization and say, well, how come you couldn't keep your capacity up? We needed to just get a real sense of where things are at so that we can be clear about that in our advocacy and in the work as our system is trying to figure out system-wide, where do we go and how do we do more things moving forward. So I think that is what I would share on that project. Everything should, hopefully, I think we have all the information we need at this point, but if you hear from someone at the county asking you for that information, please do get them the info as soon as you're able. Thanks.
Thank you, Hillary. And then a couple of reminders of things we've touched on in previous meetings. The 2020 census is coming up. The Census Bureau is resuming their operations on a phased approach. People now have until the end of October to fill out the form. For those who are living unsheltered, the census captures those numbers through a process called service-based enumeration, where they count folks at the places where they access services. This year, that will be happening September 22nd, 23rd, and 24th. The 22nd will be a count of those living in emergency shelter programs. The 22nd. The 23rd will be of those who access mobile medical vans or food programs. And then the night of the 23rd into the 24th will be a survey of those sleeping unsheltered outside. There's no need to wait for that process to get your clients counted. We want to encourage everyone who is working with clients and has the ability to help them fill out the form to do it either online or over the phone. The online portal will ask for an address. If you click I don't have an address, it will take you to a page that allows you to provide a narrative description of where that person lives. That could be something like a street intersection or a park location that works for them. Phone options are also available and are probably the best way to deal with anyone who needs language translation services. So just a quick reminder, we will be touching on that in more detail as we get closer to that date. Then we also want to remind folks about the newly created pandemic EBT benefits. This is a resource that we touched on at a previous meeting. Just a quick recap, this is the amount of money that a child would have been eligible for to receive in a free or reduced price school meal that is going to be provided through them on what is essentially an EBT card. We've put together a blog post that explains this in more detail. We've recorded a training done by Claire Lane of the Anti-Hungry Nutrition Coalition, along with her PowerPoint slides. If you're looking for more information, or if you have staff or colleagues that might want to know more about this, I encourage you to check that information out at the link below. And then we have a couple of new resources we want to touch on, or perhaps newer resources. A lot of the folks on this call have helped us advocate for additional access to daytime hygiene services in Seattle and King County. And there's just a couple of things to highlight around that. As some of you may know, the Seattle Public Libraries have a limited reopen of their bathroom facilities in order to make that service available. The locations, there's 5 locations across the city: the downtown Central Branch, the Ballard Library, the Beacon Hill Branch, Capitol Hill, and the University District. All of those locations are open from 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. every day of the week, excluding major holidays. And I just want to say that, you know, this was done in large part because of advocacy efforts done by our coalition members, raising awareness about the lack of daytime hygiene services. So thank you all for you who were involved with that. And then kind of a related update is that the city of Seattle has pulled online their mobile shower trailers. This is a service that is available through the city that is being currently staffed by the Millionaire Club. There's two components of this service. There is one shower installation that is, for the time being, sort of permanent, and that's located at the King Street station at 303 South Jackson Street. There's another shower trailer that moves between two locations. The other one is at the Seattle Center at 305 Harrison Street, Tuesday through Saturday. And then that moves to the University Heights Center for Sunday and Monday. And those hours are also 10 to 4. There's no formal intake process for these services. Anyone who is interested can show up starting at 8 a.m. To access them. And folks can stay in the shower unit for up to 45 minutes, which is quite a bit longer than other comparable daytime hygiene services. They unfortunately don't have on-site laundry or other things available, but there's a real lack of available shower access right now. So we want to make sure that folks are aware of this. We'll be sending out links to both of those resources in the follow-up email. And then finally, we have an update related to the King County Metro Paratransit Access Program. King County Metro has announced that Access Paratransit services are now temporarily available for riders with disabilities who can't reach their essential destinations due to decreased bus service, even if they are not yet fully enrolled in the Access Transportation Program. Riders with disabilities who need assistance should call the Metro Customer Service line at 206-205-5000. This is the same number that folks can begin to register for the Access program. So if people have ongoing transit needs that might need additional assistance, we do encourage you to apply. They've streamlined the Access application process to be either over the phone or online. So again, if you have folks who are needing a little bit of extra help getting to and from their medical appointments, to grocery shopping, what have you, this is a temporarily expanded option. And again, we will include this in the follow-up email. All right, so now member updates. We try and give some time in our meetings for our coalition members to share with you all what they've been working on in the community and invite you into their work. Today we have a presentation courtesy of the Mockingbird Society. We've been joined by Becca Minikowski and Orion Olson, who are going to talk a little bit about their upcoming Youth Leadership Summit and some of the housing and homelessness priorities that they plan to focus on at that event. Becca, thank you so much for joining us here this morning.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks for having me again. My pronouns are she, her. I'm going to drop some links in the chat for you all to check out what we're about to talk about. But it's kind of interesting that Jason just talked about hygiene services, because our youth advocates ending homelessness have actually been very interested in this advocacy topic this year. So without further ado, I'm just going to go ahead and turn it over to one of our chapter members, Orion, and I'll let him tell you a little bit about Summit and our topic this year.
Thank you, Becca. Hi, my name is Orion Olson. I use he, him pronouns. I'm the Youth Advocates Ending Homelessness Leadership Team member. And Mockingbird is, we work with across Washington to transform foster care and youth homelessness. We have the Mockingbird Times, which publishes art and articles written by our young people with lived experience in foster care and or homelessness. And we have monthly chapter meetings in 7 different locations throughout the state. And these chapters of young people drive our advocacies and come up with new ideas each year. We present these at our annual Youth Leadership Summit. Summit is the kickoff to our advocacy season. Each chapter presents an idea that requires policy or law change and would improve the lives of young people in foster care or homelessness, or experiencing homelessness. This year, Summit will be on July 29th from 1 to 3 p.m. And the best way to get involved is to follow the Mockingbird Society on Facebook and YouTube. This year, Summit will be streamed live on YouTube. And this is a great opportunity to listen to our chapters, consider their ideas and expertise, and reflect on ways that you might be able to help make them happen. I feel that it is important to have young people like at the width of experience, being the ones to lead in advocacy. I guess I really strongly connect with the phrase or saying of "nothing about us without us." Like you can't really make informed decisions without us at the table, and that goes for any group experiencing like disadvantage or discrimination in society. This year, the Youth Advocates Ending Homelessness, or YA chapter, is focusing on the problem of what happens to young homeless people when they are discharged from hospitals or clinics. We have found that health organizations are not doing a good enough job screening for homelessness and then planning around it when making discharge plans. We want to make it a standard for these places to screen for homelessness at intake and provide wound care or simple hygiene kits at discharge. And we hope that this will change. This change will save folks from having to come back to be seen again for injuries or illnesses that get worse under the conditions of homelessness.
Thanks, Orion. So I'm just going to pop in the chat one more time. If you want to see all the work that our chapters are doing, please join us live on YouTube, on Facebook on July 29th from 1 to 3 p.m. We'll also have it available archived afterwards so you can watch it, reflect on it, and really dig deep into how you can support making these policy dreams into policy realities. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Becca. And then we want to give a tiny bit of time for other member updates as well, for other organizations who might have content they want to share. I believe that we might be being joined this morning by Michael Hall-Young with the Healthcare for the Homeless Network for a quick update. Do we have Michael on the call currently?
Michael's here. Thank you guys for letting us come on today. Just wanted to inform everybody that at Healthcare for the Homeless, we had gone through and created some materials that were specifically to those living homeless. We recognized at the very beginning of COVID, we, Public Health and we, Healthcare for the Homeless, were doing a lot of different policies and kind of like guidance documents that were aimed specifically to like health coworkers, and it was like a ton of text. It was like hard to read. I didn't even really want to read it as one of the people who was on the team helping create it. And so we realized that we needed to be able to write information and be able to make posters and different things like that to be able to give out directly to people who are experiencing homelessness, so that way they didn't have to try to go through this 4-page all text document as they are worried about other things that are happening in their lives. And so we have 4 so far. They are all listed on our website, which I can, I'll read out and then I can also throw in the chat box. And so, oh, perfect. I can just throw it in there. Appreciate that. And so our website, for those, I'm assuming everybody's on their computer, but for those who are not, it's www.kingcounty.gov/COVID, COVID/homeless. And so on there, as you scroll down, there will be a drop-down box that says consumer materials. We just wanted to, 1, let everybody know that those exist, and 2, also ask people for their input. As we created the materials, we got input from a select number of direct service providers and some people who have who are currently or have in the past experienced homelessness. And so as you guys are looking at it, as you guys are working with your clients, if there are things that you see that need to be changed or updated, or if there's topics that you do not see on there that you think are important, feel free to let us know. Feel free, you can send it directly to me. My email address is the letter M, Young, Y-O-U-N-G, Hall, H-A-L-L, @kingcounty.gov. Can throw that in the chat box too in a second. And so we just wanted to make sure we get that out there. So if everybody could like just take a look, feel free to use them for your clients. I think there's one that's a 2-pager that we usually print front and back, and all the other ones are 1-pagers. Also just want to let people know that we at Health for the Homeless also recognize the need for hygiene services during this time. And so while we, are a government entity, so can't do a whole advocacy bit, what we can do is kind of use our power within King County to be able to get resources to give out. And so we have a number of hygiene kits that we have been giving out to outreach workers to be able to pass out to their clients. And so these kits have things like razors, shaving cream, soap, shampoo, and different things like lotion and different things like that. We also just ordered and came in, I believe yesterday, some shower wipes. So that way those who are experiencing homelessness can still be able to kind of like bathe and do like light showering, even if they're not able to make it to one of the open hygiene centers. And so for those who are on this call, who are working with clients, feel free to shoot me an email and let me know if you would like to get some of these, and then that way we can work together to set up kind of like time and quantities and different things like that. So I'm gonna stop so that way I don't take up too much time on your guys' meeting, but thank you for letting us come on here, and I hope you guys have a good rest of your day.
Michael, thank you so much for joining us and for sharing those resources. The 4 links that were mentioned will again be included in the follow-up email. And then I believe that Chris with the Eastside Legal Assistance Program would also like to share a brief update on some of their virtual services.
Yeah, thanks so much. Good to see everyone here today. My name is Chris Lovings. I work as the Community Engagement Manager for Eastside Legal Assistance Program. I'm going to put my name in the chat, and there's also some links for you there. So our whole goal is to make sure the legal system is most accessible to those that are most in need. We do telephonic legal clinics, kind of like King County Bar Association does. We've also been doing webinars recently. Something came through earlier about the PEBT program. And for that specific program, we're actually going to be coordinating with Solid Ground and presenting information for people on the PEBT program and the DCAP program. I want to make a point, a thorough line kind of what we're talking about. When you're talking about the undocumented community, these are individuals that didn't receive stimulus checks. They don't receive unemployment benefits. They also are barred from receiving some federal money, actually all federal money, because that could be a public charge and actually hinder them in gaining a green card. And so when we're talking about legislation like JumpStart Seattle, and it mentions protections for or funds going to the undocumented immigrant and refugee communities, that's what's important to note. A lot of these communities have been missed or aren't receiving benefits that other people receive. I think I also want to highlight something that Edmund touched on a little bit and has been mentioned previously, and this goes back to the advocacy piece. The rent moratorium is set to expire in August. Unemployment benefits, there's an extra $600 per month that's set to expire in August as well, and rent is still going to be due after that point. Different cities, if you're lucky enough to live in Seattle, Federal Way, and Burien, have put in place just cause ordinances and kind of ways to mitigate COVID and saying that, for X amount of time after this emergency is over, or after moratorium, you cannot be evicted for being unable to pay rent during COVID. I want to highlight something that Joy Scott from the City of Auburn put in the chat a little while ago around the City of Auburn is also considering an ordinance for just cause eviction. Basically, if you don't live in Seattle, Burien, or Federal Way, a landlord can evict you and not tell you the reason why. That's why there needs to be a just cause ordinance is put in place. And so I just want to make sure that is highlighted because a lot of the conversations I'm seeing around the east side of King County, Bellevue, Kirkland, Issaquah, and Redmond, they are hopefully working towards implementing these kind of things as well. And so this is something that cities, if you're in a city that isn't one of the ones that I listed, you need to advocate to your city to put these protections in place to protect renters. I think that's pretty much my piece, but I would love to chat with anyone else that has anything else to add or would have any questions about anything like that. So Chris, thank you all so much.
Excellent, Chris. Thank you for that update. I think we have perhaps 1 more minute before our last meeting portion. Is there anyone else who wants to jump in and offer a quick update about your agency? Wonderful. Well, if not, then I think I'm going to throw things back over to Allison, who has a bittersweet portion of the meeting to end us on today.
Thanks, everybody. Well, as usual, I am just grateful for the fact that 77 people took time to join with us this morning. We have a wealth of resources and information in our community, and it is the power of this organization that we are able to convene and unite to get things done despite extraordinary circumstances. The tradition, I guess, that we've started during COVID-19 of having some poetry or music to close our meetings out is a lovely tradition that we hope and intend to continue. Some of you may have connections to musicians, artists, poets. Some of you may be musicians, artists, poets, in which case I invite you to reach out and get in touch with us. We have a few a few artists whom we are lining up for future meetings. But as we plan today's meeting, jam-packed as always, we realized we wanted to take some time to really give Hillary a bit of a group goodbye and thank you. There is a great deal that we can touch on, and I'm not going to even begin to try to do all of that right now. I did a little quick math, however. You know, we like to ground our advocacy in data. So since Hillary started at the Coalition in the very end of the summer in 2014, my rough estimate is that she has helped some 7,000 kids experiencing homelessness to get backpacks, school supplies, dental kits with full-size floss, and age-appropriate and diverse books. She's probably helped at least 1,500 people experiencing homelessness register to vote. She's helped to orient and train hundreds of volunteers, and she's helped to organize at least 6,000 volunteers when you put together the work on the one night count, our interview projects, voter registration and civic engagement work, and Project Cool for back to school. But the uncounted number is how many postcards has Hillary helped to format, to hand out, to collect, and to deliver to elected officials. It's probably, without exaggeration, in the tens of thousands. And not only that, we have the spreadsheets to prove it, because in addition to everything else during her time at the Coalition, Hillary has absolutely become the Excel queen. But I think what I just want to note is really a little quotation from the great poet and writer Maya Angelou, who said, and I'm going to paraphrase here, that what she's learned is that over time, people will forget what you've said and they will forget what you've done, but they will always remember how you made them feel. I think one of the things I first noticed when Hillary joined the Coalition was that she had a genuine warmth and openness and respect for each and every person whom she interacted with. And she has, through that, helped to create the culture that we try to cultivate within the Coalition, that we treat every person with respect, that we fight for every person to be treated with respect, and that we strive to engage, even if there's disagreement, and to be thoughtful about the long-term effects of what we're trying to do. As the Coalition board and staff, and you all are members and partners, worked to develop the new mission, vision, and value statements. I think we all got to see how Hillary's very quiet, firm, consistent commitment to racial equity as a focus of the work that she's doing in this world has really helped to inform and shape what we've been able to publicly embrace and commit to working to deepen within the coalition. And that's a tremendous legacy to our organization. So thank you, Hillary. So I think Sasha and Jason were each going to say a couple of words, and then we asked Hillary to say a few words, and we have a slideshow that Sasha put together. Jason, do you want to say a couple of words?
Yeah, I'll jump in quickly. I worked with Hillary for many years without even really realizing who she was or how important she was to the movement. I first interacted with her when I was the agency contact at 211 for Project Cool Back to School in collecting colored pencil supplies for that drive. I then, a couple of years later, as a case manager for CCS, attended a voter registration training that she put on because I wanted to better understand how to help my clients register to vote. It wasn't until I joined the staff about a year ago that I really understood how much Hillary is just a backbone of this movement and really supports all the work that we're doing. And frankly, when I was offered this position, one of the things I was most excited about was the opportunity to work with someone with the intellect and integrity that she brings to this work. I hope I have absorbed as much of the information of her 6 years as possible. And I'm just really excited to see where Hillary ends up. I know that wherever she lands in this world and in this work, she's going to bring in incredible joy and energy to that work. And that's what I want to say.
Thanks, Jason. I also will say a few things. I finally have my camera. This is Sasha with the Coalition. When I first started, I had the pleasure of having a chance to get some coffee with everyone, one-on-one on staff, and Hillary being the community projects manager and having been at the Coalition so long, there's so much to learn from her, and it felt, I hadn't worked with a small team, so it felt a little overwhelming to come into a small team that is so tight-knit. And Hillary said, in following up on Allison's comment about staff culture, she said, we have a staff culture and it's going to adapt because you're joining our team and we're going to build a new culture together for our team. And that meant so much coming from her and being able to feel comfortable joining a small team with the Coalition. I've learned so much from Hillary, and there's still so much to learn. And I also had the pleasure of interacting with her before joining the Coalition through voter registration work, where I was as a case manager previously, and also at some community meetings. I'm really excited for her next journey and where she's going to go. And I'm excited that it certainly is not the end of sharing a space together. And I just really appreciate what Hillary's brought to the Coalition and to our community. And yeah, thank you.
Great. Okay. Well, Hillary, we don't want to put you on the spot, but I think we want to give you a chance to offer a few reflections. And then maybe when you're done, we'll just start the slideshow and let people chat in the chat box.
Great. Well, thank you, everyone, and thanks to my team for sharing those words. Working at the Coalition, we've been through some various iterations of Allison and I and other staff over my 6 years, and I've always appreciated the dedication that our small team puts into the work. And really, I don't think someone could work at the Coalition if their heart wasn't in it. And I think that I appreciate that of all the staff. And well, it is very hard and bizarre to say goodbye. I know that everyone here in our coalition, which is all of you, our members and folks that advocate with us, are in good hands with the staff that we have and with the upcoming new staff. I think that I would just say, I've appreciated learning from everyone in this coalition. It's been an interesting 6 years. I would always tell people kind of outside of this world, and maybe it's a helpful reflection for those of us who are a little more in this policy stuff, that when I started at the coalition was, homelessness was in the news a little bit, but it didn't seem like it was as prevalent in the news. We often would be advocating for some items, or like trying to get, like when we think about candidates forums that we work on around elections, trying to get a question about homelessness into a candidates forum, whereas now homelessness is one of the things that everyone is talking about all the time, and elected officials are really focusing on it. And while I wish that didn't have to be the case, I do think that the coalition and this and all of your organizations speaking up and continuing to do advocacy has really been a major impact on that dialogue. And I look forward, it's going to be weird for me to step out of this role in advocacy, but I know that I'll be continuing that with you all. And I look forward to seeing the continued advocacy, and just know that all of your voices and all the voices of people who speak up and have direct experience with homelessness or direct experience as service providers are so important in this dialogue. And I appreciate that the coalition, our board and staff and organization have always really centered our work around that. So in case you didn't hear, I am headed to the UW-Evans School to get a Master of Public Administration. So I will be here still in the community. I will most likely be doing all online classes in the fall. But I am really looking forward to the opportunity to learn even deeper in a different way about some of the policy work, and take everything that I have learned and done at the coalition into my work as well. And like I mentioned, I am sure I will be around, and I'll look forward to being a little bit on the other side of getting the action alerts and taking action and seeing how we can plug in. But I will figure out how to stay in touch with folks, and I will be at the coalition for about a month longer. This was just going to be my last general membership meeting. So thank you everyone so much for all the relationships we've had, and I look forward to continuing to collaborate in ways which we shall all see.
Lovely. Thank you, Hillary. So as I mentioned at the beginning, we're working on finding a date and time when we can have some sort of an open house, a virtual open house where people can drop in and chat. And we'll probably set that in the next week or so, and everybody will get information about how to join us for that. As another chance, another way, opportunity to connect. Maybe we'll even use the breakout room feature. And I have a line on some music, so there'll be some festivity as well. So we're almost at the end of our time. Sasha, I think we'll ask you to roll the slideshow, and thank you all for joining us. Stay tuned for advocacy opportunities coming up, and stay in touch.
Thank you.